I'm Daryl Reeves. I want to talk to you today about a couple of things that fall into the category or classification in my vernacular of being immutable principles. You know, I've grown up in the Judeo-Christian background and culture, like, I guess a large percentage of white people growing up, and I had nothing to do with that. It was not my choice. It's where I found myself. I'm not saying I rejected it or ran away from it. I'm just saying it was just where I found myself. Maybe you found yourself like my wife, growing up in a Buddhist culture, and maybe you found yourself in India, growing up in a Hindu culture, or Japanese in a Shinto culture, or Arabian and growing up in a Muslim culture. It's actually irrelevant to me what your cultural disposition and experience is. I respect it and I appreciate it, and I love the diversity of the various cultures. When I eat food, I don't just eat British food, which was the culture of my mum and dad. I don't just eat Kiwi food, New Zealand food, because I was born and raised in New Zealand. I don't just eat Australian food, where I spent a number of years living and raising a family of my own. I don't just eat Thai food, where I live now with my partner and our child. I eat a diversity of foods, and I love them. Mexican and Italian, they're all fantastic. I probably get sick of having the same one every day, certainly every meal. So I do want variety. And that's what I love about this planet of 7 billion people, the variety that we share and enjoy. And it's not the cultural experiences that necessarily create the rules and the laws by which I want to live my life, but they certainly create wonderful exposure for me and the opportunity to grow and expand and be more than I was if I was just my little Kiwi kind of self, or my British parentage sort of self, or my Judeo-Christian upbringing self. But you know what I've found in all of the cultures and all of the experiences of all of the people I've ever gotten to know, and of course that's not a very large number compared to the 7 billion on the planet, but I'm sure there's some serious commonalities. And like you, I've certainly watched enough television, seen enough people, and experienced enough, at least at arm's length, to know that this variety exists everywhere, and that I'm smart enough, like you, to know that unless we have a foundation of respect for one another, then we're never really going to optimize what we could be as a species. I'm gonna have a gulp of my coffee. So what I want to talk about is what I've found to be something very, very powerful in my experience. And it's not the cultural rules and regulations that I grew up with, but it's the immutable principles. Now, every great culture over the thousands of years of its evolution have evolved the things that actually work, and documented even in many cases these things. Certainly the Judeo-Christian culture have documented a lot of things that work. Now there's a lot of things in there that are just, to me, my mind, superfluous and just religious points of view and dogmas and doctrines, but there are things in there that are absolutely immutable. And I want to come to right back to my own personal cultural experience. And I don't classify myself as a Judeo/Christian person these days. I don't like the labels. I don't want to be labeled. I just want to be a human being. And I want to treat you and respect you as a human being. And however, I do want to honor and acknowledge the immutable principles I've learned in my life. And I do want to encourage you to think about these things and find them in your own culture. And you'll find that the immutable principles that you come up with are pretty much the same immutable principles that I'll come up with, even though we might come from different religions, different political backgrounds and points of view. It doesn't really matter whether you're an atheist or a theist. It doesn't really matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, a conservative or a liberal, black or white, red or yellow. we're all God's children. If you just want to call God life, which is my favorite word for God, life with a capital L. And if you want to realize that we're all life's children, we're all God's children, we're all made in the image and likeness of God, then from that starting point, we can find commonality. We can stretch our arms around one another, we can love one another, we can care for one another, we can do good to one another. And so as I was growing up in my Sunday school days, we learned about the 10 Commandments. I'm sure you know at least what they are, even if you can't quote them. I'm not sure I could quote them off the top of my head right now. But I certainly know the first two, because that's the topic of my conversation today, the 2 immutable principles. And the first commandment of the 10 Commandments that Moses supposedly went up into Mount Sinai and was given by God, carved in stone. The first commandment was, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all your heart, with all your mind, and all your strength. To me, that is an immutable principle. Forgetting and leaving aside all of the religious trappings that can be added into that, and thinking about it perhaps more from a step back, from the metaphorical point of view, not even the metaphor, but even the reality, but not sort of the religious reality. Thinking of it from the point of view of, if God is the greater power than you. Now, a lot of people might be thinking, well, I don't know if there's a greater power than me. Well, of course there is. Absolutely there is. You don't make your own liver clean your own blood. You don't make your kidneys function in your body. You don't make your heart pump blood around your system. You don't make your synapses connect inside your brain. A power greater than your consciousness does that. Now, it's part of who you are, and you're part of what it is, and it's certainly classified, can fall generally under the classification called life, but you don't consciously do it. So there is a power greater than your conscious being to be able to do these things, and that gives you existence, because when that power stops automatically causing you to breathe in and breathe out, to automatically keep your heart pumping, to automatically keep your brain functioning, then pretty soon whoever the you is that's living inside that meat bag called a body and looking out of those windows called eyes at me, and I'm doing the same back at you, when that stops, your meat bag falls to the ground, and it's of very little use anymore. It'll just degrade biologically and end up becoming food for grass and worms, and that's the end of that. Maybe. I don't know if there's life after this experience. And that's not my point here today. My point is, there is a power greater than you. There's a power greater than me. And when we start with that premise, love that power, that Lord, that God, that's the God of our life. If I'm going to bow down and worship anything, I mean, I love my mum, I love my dad, I love my brothers and sisters and my family, my children, my wife. I love a lot of people in my world, my friends, but I'm not going to bow down and worship them, because they're equal with me as human beings. But I'm going to be grateful and appreciative for that power that's greater than me. And I'm looking up, but it's not only up, it's in. It's both within and without. It's in me and around me. I live in it and it lives in me. Life sustains me and my existence. Life keeps the birds' wings flapping. Life keeps the animals alive on the planet. It keeps the insects there. Keeps all the creatures going. It's life. It's that supreme energy. I couldn't keep one insect alive, not by my own will and intellect and knowledge. I don't have the capacity to be able to do that. So this is the power I'm talking about, this greater power. And I think if you consider the first commandment, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all your heart. That's not talking about your blood pump. That's talking about the core of your being, the sort of inner you, the real you, your passion, the core of the matter, the heart of the matter, like the heart of a tree, the core of the subject. You've got to love God with all of your heart, with all of your passion, and all of your mind. And you allow your mind to resonate with this truth and get in sync with this truth, and all of your strength, your body. You know, if you don't love life with your body, then you're going to do yourself damage. You start eating food that's not good for you because you're not loving life that's sustaining your body with your strength. And that's what it means to me in a practical sense. But when we love God with all of our heart, mind, and strength, we synchronize ourselves with the energy, the power, and the intelligence of life to do ourselves the maximum amount of good. You know, if you've ever experienced surfing or sailing, you understand from an experiential, physical perspective what it is to be in tune with the power that's greater than you as it operates and shows up in nature, in the sea, for example. I remember, you know, I used to sail a little hobby cat a few times, not very many times, maybe half a dozen times or so. I've sailed a little hobby cat. And a hobby cat is just a rubber mattress stretched between two pontoons, and there's a sail up the middle, and it takes one or two people on it, and you can sail around on that thing. And I was out in Perth, Australia with a friend of mine one day. He had a hobby cat and I had a hobby cat. We were out sailing past the breakwater, and I wasn't a very good sailor. Maybe I'd been sailing 3 or 4 times. I'm still never have been a good sailor, but I was out there sailing around, and I did a rather sharp turn, and the hobby cat pontoon, one side came up, the side that I happened to be sitting on came up in the end, and it just tipped me over, tipped the whole craft over, and I fell through the sail. The sail material must have been a little bit shabby because it ripped and tore very badly, and I went straight through it. So that was the end of that sailing experience on that craft. My friend had to sail back to the shore, go and get the guy that had rented us the hobby cats. He came out in his little speedboat, picked me up and dragged the boats back in. But that was me being out of sync with the force that was greater than me, in this case, the wind. I didn't get myself in sync with the force that was greater than me and sail that little craft properly. I used to do a little bit of surfing, and if you've ever tried, it's difficult to surf, to stand up on that surfboard and get in sync with the power of the waves, and so that you can enjoy the ride rather than being tipped off and topsy-turvy through the sand on the bottom of the ocean, which can be pretty horrible, getting sand in your ears and in your nose and everywhere else. You know, it's so important to understand the importance of getting in sync with the greater power, of loving that greater power to the degree that we wouldn't want to offend it. You know, if you want to surf effectively, you cannot offend the waves. You will never win. You will always get dumped. If you want to sail, you cannot offend the wind. Not offense like a person takes offense, but you cannot do what doesn't work with the wind. The wind is an immutable law. Life is an immutable law. It's not a rule. It's not a speed rule where it says, you know, you have to go 50 kilometers an hour or 30 miles an hour, whichever, you know, you happen to think in. And you can break that law, and it's a matter of whether you're going to be caught or not. Many times we've gotten away with speeding. Many times we've gotten away with breaking the laws of man. But nobody gets away with breaking the laws of God or the laws of life with a capital L. You just can't. You can't break the laws of gravity. If I jump off my balcony right now, being 12 floors up, I'm going to go for a trip straight down because gravity's going to take me down, and I wouldn't last that fall. It'll destroy me. And so this is true on so many levels, on these obvious, simple little illustrations I'm giving you level. And it's true on so many more subtle levels. You know, when it comes down to our thoughts that we hold on to and our attitudes of anger, or our attitudes of frustration, or our attitudes of deceiving people and not telling the truth. These are all immutable laws. These are not the laws of mankind made up by a man. They may have been recognized by mankind, but they were not made up by mankind. The first commandment may have been recognized by Moses and the early Hebrew people, Israelite people, and been, carved into a stone rock or something, into the tablets of stone. But that is an immutable principle. Don't get trapped into thinking it's some sort of Christian or Jewish dogma, because it isn't. They may have made it into a dogma, but it was a principle long before it was ever a dogma. Sometimes we throw the baby out with the bathwater. Sometimes we realize that there's so much wrong with religion that everything must be wrong with religion, therefore. And that's just not the case. I grew up a religious person, and I enjoyed it for many years of my life, and then I had a rebellion against it, and I left the church as a rather angry person, and for several years I just could not get over my anger and frustration with the organization. And I still recognize the flaws and the faults of big religion, and in general terms I don't like big religion. But I'm not ungrateful today for the immutable principles that I learnt, like the first commandment, learning to love or respect and act in harmony with, act in synchronicity with the laws of life, the laws that govern my life and my experience, with all my heart, with all my mind, and with all my strength. My whole being goes in this direction of being in sync with the immutable principles of life. And the second commandment is just like it. It's this: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Wow, what a concept. That's not a law of man. That's not some religious law. It may have been adopted by a number of religions in various forms. It's certainly been, for a long time now, several thousand years, the second law of the 10 commandments of the Hebrew people and of the Christian people. But long before Moses ever inscribed that in stone, if that's what happened, that was a principle that when you break it, you're the one who gets hurt. It's not a law in terms of a man-made rule. It's not like the speed limit that you can just break and get away with. It's a law that when you break it, it comes back and breaks you. And I have learnt that until I can learn to love my fellow man, my neighbour, those at hand, not necessarily those in the far-flung lands that we love to, give $5 to when somebody comes around shaking a bag and collecting for somebody that we've never met and never seen. And I'm not saying that's not a good thing to give to that, but at the end of the day, we've got an opportunity right at arm's length with the neighbour next door, with the people in our world, in our experience, to love them and learn what it is to get along with them, to do them good, to do good for them, with them, to them. This is the nature of love that does me good. When I do that, I am actually expressing the nature of life. Life wants to do me good. Life wants to do us all good. It's there for our benefit. The sun comes up in the morning, goes down in the evening, and it turns around and creates the seasons for us, and if we find out what those seasons are, and if we love life enough to find out how life works, and we can synchronize with life, we can have a harvest when it's harvest time, we can plant the seed when it's seed planting time, we can nurture the crop as it's growing during that nurturing period, and at the end of the day, the cycle of life turns in our favor, and we can, in general terms, enjoy the benefits of loving life with all of our heart, with all of our mind, and with all of our strength. And we can enjoy loving our neighbors as ourselves, because that builds a community. As a human species, we need each other, we need community. The only reason we've got today all the modern convenience we have and all the wonderful inventions we have is because the people have loved people. People have supported people. Investors have invested in entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs have invested in their markets, and they've served and they've helped, and the more we serve and the more we help, the more we grow and help ourselves. And this is part of the cycle and the very nature of life. And the more we can do this, the more these two immutable principles are going to work in our favor. And so I want you to think about these two laws, these two commandments, two what I like to call immutable principles, because as you acknowledge them and as you enact them in your life, and I'm going to come back at another period in time and talk to you about some of these other immutable principles, because they're the things that really matter in our world, the things we need to acknowledge. Not our political points of view, not our religious points of view, not our precious little doctrines, our little hobby horses, but the immutable principles, the big things that really matter. I'm Darryl Reeves, and it's been a pleasure sharing this with you. I hope to see you again.